The echoes of the Great War's salvos have faded. Soldiers coming back from the Eastern and Western fronts comprise survivors from both the winning and losing sides. However, not every World War II soldier returned home without injury. Many sacrificed parts of their bodies to this terrible meat grinder. We're talking about war invalids, people who have lost arms, legs, sight, hearing, and had other injuries. How did these people settle after the victory? How did their socialization go, and what did they have to face in peaceful life? Let's talk about it. Conquerors who suffered. Even war participants who appear completely healthy nevertheless experience psychological trauma during the hostilities. The brutal fighting, the sight of burnt villages, ruined cities, the victims of the Punisher's reprisals. All this could not help but affect the character of any person, since war and killing are unnatural phenomena. However, it was especially hard for those whom the war made severely disabled. Not only did they have to endure pain and the loss of some part of their body or abilities, but these people also turned out to be largely unadapted to peaceful life. They could no longer remain in the army within their military specialty, and in most cases returning to a civilian profession was impossible. Learning new skills takes time, and there are few professions globally that individuals with disability can realistically pursue. Modern people have the internet and cellular communication. Most contemporary young people find it hard to imagine that it was even different. There was not only no internet, even an ordinary telephone was not available to many. There was no automation in factories either. For work on the conveyor line, the main method of production at the time, it was necessary to have certain dexterity and agility, which was not easy for a disabled person. Returning during and after the war, disabled people often face serious financial, material, and moral problems. It was easier for disabled people who had a technical or high education. They could work as teachers, managers, etc. Individuals with below-average education, who made up the majority of such disabled people, found it considerably more challenging. There were also roles for disabled individuals in this area, such as watchmen, accountants, and similar positions. For instance, in the 1940s and 1950s, there was a role in mines known as the tobacco watcher, responsible for ensuring that smokers did not bring cigarettes and matches into the mine. As a rule, the tobacco watchers were disabled people without an arm or a leg. Drastic assessments. Regarding disabled veterans of the USSR, two contradicting perspectives come into conflict. First is that disabled war veterans were left by the state to fend for themselves, and during the late 1940s and early 1950s, the authorities systematically removed beggars with disabilities from the cities, sending them away almost to camps. The second perspective is that the authorities took every possible step to enhance the situation for the disabled, implementing all necessary measures with the constraints of the state's capabilities at the time. It seems that both perspectives stray from the truth. Moreover, the first one strays more. The decree on war invalids was adopted back in September 1941, in accordance with which the size of the pension was established depending on the group and category of disability. In late 1941, the initial homes for the disabled were opened. It was related to the fact that many soldiers and officers lost their relatives and loved ones during the war, and having become disabled found themselves needed by no one. There were also frontline soldiers who themselves refused to go to their relatives, not wanting to be a burden for them. First and foremost, these were people from the province, from rural areas where the financial situation of many families was indeed difficult. There were also cold-hearted and unprincipled relatives, like wives or siblings, who did not want to welcome their own war-injured family members. That is, the situations were different and not all, and did not always depend only on the state, as in any case. The amount of pensions also depended on rank, position held, and of course the disability level. It is clear that not many disabled people were generals or colonels. Most were privates and junior officers. Immediately after the war, the state simply was not able to pay a large number of disabled people good pensions. Therefore, the disabled who could do something were engaged in feasible work. For this, in homes for the disabled or at enterprises, special cooperatives were created, where people with disabilities could master a new profession and earn some money. Sanatoriums for war invalids were opened. However, it is often the case behind the optimistic reports and declarations about the implementation of Central Committee and Soviet government decisions within the walls of ministerial and executive committee officers, real life unfolded, which as usual did not always align with the data presented in the reports. Many people with disabilities could not overcome the psychological trauma. In times of peace, confronted with bureaucratic indifference and red tape, people tended to withdraw into themselves. They began to abuse alcohol. Naturally, there were not enough funds and the veterans gave up. They begged, stole, and became drunkards. It was not easy for the winners with disabilities to celebrate their victory. After all, this victory came at a very high price for them. In the post-war years, at railway stations near cinemas or drinking establishments, quite often one could meet people in homemade carts, on crutches, without legs, without arms, blind, and many other invalids who were begging. With military awards on their chests, they humiliated themselves before those they protected. The pension for ordinary disabled people was enough for half a month at best. The pension of the average disabled person was no more than half the earnings of the low-skilled worker and fluctuated in large cities between 200–300 rubles, which was not much in the 40s. In addition, there were people who lost both arms and legs, the so-called samovars, nicknamed after the Russian metal cauldron for boiling water. Most of them, of course, were in special facilities, but there were also the homeless whom vile relatives or criminal elements could use for their selfish purposes, turning the injuries of the unfortunate into their income. Twice in 1948 and 1954, the authorities conducted the so-called raids to clean disabled people from the streets of major cities. There are many insinuations and myths about this. Allegedly, disabled people were sent to special gulag camps. All this is of course nonsense. In fact, disabled people were sent to the facilities where they were provided proper care and as much as possible were involved in useful work, which filled the lives of these poor people with some meaning and increased their self-esteem. In the homes for the disabled, in addition to work and study activities, various entertainment and cultural events were also held. Artists performed, movies were shown, festive banquets were arranged, and so on. However, even there, a lot depended on special people, directors, heads of social services of the cities and regions where these institutions were located. Some examples. Let's start with statistics. There are a lot of discussions here too. In total, during from 1941 to 1945, 3,798,200 people were demobilized due to illness, disability, and age. Of these, 2 million were disabled. 576,000 people, including 460,000 people with amputation of upper and lower limbs. This is certainly a lot, but not millions of maimed and mutilated as it is written in some publications. So, in the Vollam home for war invalids, there was a sailor of the Baltic fleet who had lost both legs, Vasya, nicknamed Petrogradsky. He was picked up on the streets of Leningrad where he was begging, drinking, and behaving rowdy. Seeing him off to Vollam, the social security officials bought him a new uniform, gave him an accordion, and 3 boxes of cologne. Upon arrival in Vollam, Vasya, with the support of boarding school administration, organized a choir from the so-called above-mentioned samovars, whom nurses carried out on blankets, sat on benches on the shore, and to the accordion of Vasya, a choir of disabled people met and saw off the arriving and departing ships with songs. According to contemporaries' recollections, the sight was mesmerizing, living reminders to people of the terrible war, and at the same time of the fact that life, despite everything, goes on. Another example, complaint request of a first group disabled war veteran, written in the early 50s. Polivakina wrote, "I have been disabled since 1945. During this period, except for a monthly dry ration, 3 kilos of flour, 400 grams of oil, and 400 grams of sweets, I did not receive anything. My pension is 162 rubles. It cannot satisfy my needs. Existing clothes and linen become unusable, and there is no replacement. I have nothing except my former workers, so I kindly ask you to help me." Since the late 40s, they began producing invalid cars. First 3-wheeled, then 4-wheeled, which were distributed to disabled people for free. Produced prosthetics, wheelchairs, even special books for reading by visually impaired people. At the same time, there were not enough places in nursing homes for everyone. Most had small pensions, prostheses were in short supply, and they were not of the best quality. To add to this, the bureaucracy, the callousness of some officials and people around, as a result we get an ambiguous picture. The state and society, in fact, did not provide much to the disabled war veterans. Germany. It is clear that after the war, the problem of disabled people existed not only in the USSR. For example, in defeated Germany, the problem after the war was even more acute. Immediately after the war, disabled Wehrmacht soldiers were paid practically nothing. They remained in the care of various public organizations. With the advent of GDR and the Federal Republic of Germany, states began to pay small pensions to disabled people. In the Federal Republic of Germany, World War II disabled veterans also had a difficult time in the early years. Example of Norbert Lemke. In the war, his hand was injured. It practically did not work. As a disabled war veteran, he was not paid a pension. The regular disability pension, according to him, was only enough for a week. He had to work and study. By the 60s, he had grown to the position of deputy head of the road transport department. Material problems were in the past. Lemke did not like to talk about moral ones. Disabled people in Europe and the USA. In the countries that were part of the anti-Hitler coalition, the situation with disabled people also developed differently. The best situation was for the disabled and veterans of the USA, Canada, and Australia. There, disabled people received a decent pension and appropriate care. Here, not only state social security played a significant role, but also various numerous charitable foundations and private donations. In European countries affected by the war, the situation of disabled people was more difficult. However, since the beginning of the 50s in England, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and some other countries, the situation of war veterans has significantly improved. In the countries of the Eastern Bloc, the situation of people with disabilities was largely similar to the USSR. Be that as it may, people with disabilities generally have a difficult time even today. And for people who received psychological traumas at the same time as physical, it is twice as difficult. And not everything depends only on the material situation. If, for example, in England or in France, as for the disabled who fought in the resistance and on the side of de Gaulle, the disabled of war were looked at heroes and surrounded with care, then in both Germany and Italy, the disabled who fought on the side of the fascist regimes did not cause sympathy in society. In general, this topic requires separate study and reflection. However, we all have to once again bow deeply to all the disabled individuals and veterans, both those who are still with us and those who have passed away, who sacrificed their lives and health in the fight against fascism.